Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this Wednesday for our weekly webinar. Believe it or not, it is March already, and I'm happy that we are here, that we are mostly healthy, and that we are enjoying a bright sunny day. I know it's a little early for spring tulips, but if you're anything like me, the warm weather and the melting snow really has you looking forward to spring. So I did want to share this picture from our Concordia neighborhood that was taken last year. And it will be just a couple months before we start seeing these tulips popping up again. We're going to begin our webinar today with some updates from Near West Side Partners. The first and most notable is our upcoming meetings on our Choice Neighborhood Action activities. Next week, we will be gathering neighbors together to discuss the neighborhood markers that are planned for each individual neighborhood. We have 3 meetings next week with Merrill Park, Martin Drive, and the Pigsville Valley neighborhood. The dates are up there on the screen, and you can also visit the website nearwestsidemke.org for information about the action activities and how to register to obtain the Zoom link to join the meetings. We are really excited about the neighborhood markers, and it's really important to get your feedback. If you do have any questions, I ask that you please email Anna Wyrick at ccc@nearwestsidepartners.org, and she will follow up with more information for you. Great news is coming out every day about COVID-19 vaccine and its availability. And it has given me a lot of hope for 2021. And as we look forward to a return to our more normal kind of life, we do have information that we are helping to share to help spread the news about vaccine updates and availability. Advocate Aurora recently held a webinar as part of their Live Well series, and that is available on Near West Side Partners Facebook page. You can also visit advocateaurorahealth.org and healthymke.com for vaccine eligibility updates. I do recommend, if you can, get your vaccine and do keep yourself safe. While we are definitely in a place where things are trending in a more positive direction, we are still in the midst of a pandemic. So we do need to continue to do everything we can to keep ourselves safe. That includes wearing a mask, keeping a physical distance from individuals, and avoiding crowds when possible. So while I think we are all anxious for the pandemic to be in the rearview mirror, let's do what we can to make sure that we're staying safe until we know we're safely clear. We have some other great updates. The Hunger Task Force Mobile Market is going to be making a stop in the Near West Side. On Monday, March 8th, the mobile market will be at College Court at 1:30. For those who haven't visited the mobile market before, anyone can shop at the mobile market. It's open to everyone. And it does have fresh fruits and veggies, fresh meats, including chicken, beef, dairy, lunch meats. There's milk, both dairy and non-dairy options, and cheese and yogurt. The market does accept debit cards, credit cards, and EBT cards. They do not take cash. And there is an additional 25% off of the retail price when you shop at the market. So if you are available this Monday, March 8th, make a stop at College Court. That is at 34th and Highland at 1:30. More great news coming from our friends at Hunger Task Force. Pandemic EBT is a new program that is going to provide grocery benefits to parents to help replace the value of school meals while children are out of school. And this is available to those who are currently receiving food share and those who are not. So for more information, you can visit hungertaskforce.org and they have information there about how you can get additional money to support your grocery shopping. And another really important update for our Near West Side residents, MCTS is making changes to bus routes that run through the Near West Side as part of the MCTS Next program. And some of those changes include new routes, greater frequency, and new stops. I know the 31 is going to be running every 25 minutes now, which is a real great benefit to those who rely on that route. Do check out the ridemcts.com website to learn more about those route changes. They will go into effect this Sunday, March 7th. And with that, I will sum up our Near West Side updates and turn it over to our guests. Today, we are talking about eviction mediation for renters and landlords. And our guests are Amy Koltz and Joanne Lipo Zovic from Mediate Milwaukee. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and invite Joanne and Amy to turn on their cameras. Thank you both for joining us today. I'm so excited to have you here. As a residential neighborhood with a lot of multifamily and rental units available, eviction is a reality for both our renters and for our landlords. So I know you two have a lot of great information to share with us today. Amy, I know if you would like to begin with your presentation, and then we can open it up to our attendees for a Q&A.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having us today. I'll go ahead and share my screen with a few short slides. So as Lindsay indicated, I'm Amy Koltz. I'm the executive director, and joining me today is sometimes referred to as my partner in crime, but really a collaborator on this effort, and our staff mediator, Joanne Lipo. Just to start out with a few general questions and information about our program and services. In general, mediation is a process that through our program is free and voluntary, and it's a confidential process from the standpoint that there's no court record created or any other publicly accessible record of when you participate in mediation, with, of course, the exception that if a mediated agreement is reached, that could be used in court if the parties choose to do so, or if that case is already in the court process, it can be presented to the commissioner or the judge. But by and large, our conversations, discussions in mediation are really kept just between the mediators and the parties. Our mediators are trained professionals. All of the focus in housing disputes, particularly landlord and tenant disputes or issues that could impact the parties. And we really focus on working with landlords and tenants with the goal of avoiding preventable evictions. So in an instance where eviction seems to be the only appropriate path, we certainly wouldn't stand in the way of that happening. But again, the goal would be to help give landlords and tenants options outside of the court legal process or outside of an eviction judgment being entered if there's another way to reach a resolution. Mediators don't judge the situation or the parties themselves. We would never come in and say, we think you should do this, or under these circumstances, this is what you have to do. We really create a dialogue with the landlord and tenant where appropriate, and try to help the parties open lines of communication with an eye towards seeking solutions that will be agreeable to both sides.
And as an add-on to some of the information before I talk about eligibility, most of the mediation work that Amy and I and our other mediator, Debbie, does is through the phone. And so we're talking to the parties, typically one-on-one. On occasion, we'll get people on a three-way call, but most of the time it's us talking to the landlord or us talking to the tenant, and then serving as a conduit to try and open up those lines of communication. And so, and when Amy said, if there's an eviction filed, we don't stand in the way as much as we might challenge you to say, instead of going through court, maybe we can talk about how to get this property back to the landlord in a way that doesn't harm the tenant. So it might be a mediated move out agreement as opposed to an eviction where someone is forced. So that's kind of an example of that notion of a preventable eviction, right? And so really what we're trying to do is also get people to think about engaging in this process earlier. So that kind of goes to the eligibility. For us right now, it's available to landlords and tenants for properties located in the city or county of Milwaukee, because that's connected to our funding. It's a free service. So we're not charging the landlords or the tenants for this service. And so we're constrained only by kind of the dynamics of our funding, essentially. And right now, really the greatest need, honestly, is in Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County at the present time anyways. Not surprising, since that's the highest population center in our state. And then really the eligibility is to deal with any issue that could escalate to a filed eviction. So our goal is to get landlords or tenants to think about, there's an issue that's kind of bubbling up that could potentially rise to be a problem. Right now, the most common issue, of course, is rent because of the pandemic and how people are so impacted economically. But it could be other issues. It could be issues in a dispute with a neighbor. It could be something related to a property condition. And so again, we're trying to prevent things that could result in an eviction being filed, or in the case where there is a filed eviction, to try and de-escalate that and maybe pull it out of that environment and get an agreement where the case could be dismissed. Because there's also a significant negative impact of an eviction on the record of a tenant. It impacts people's credit. It impacts your ability to find other rental properties in the future. So those are all issues that we want to address. One of the things that is currently not eligible for mediation is the return of security deposits for a tenant who's already moved out. And really the driver there, that's something that at a point in time we did try and help folks with, because that's really an issue in securing the next place. However, right now with the volume of need that we've got, that's just not a place where we can designate our resources. And so we would likely direct you to other resources. That might be a referral to one of the civil legal service providers, legal aid or legal action, or even, the Milwaukee Justice Center to help you if you wanted to file something on your own to try and to deal with that issue. So that's really about eligibility. And if you're in doubt, contact us. We'd rather tell you, nope, we're not going to do this, than to have you not ask. We'd rather you ask for the help and then let us either direct you or provide some assistance.
So the best way to request mediation is to go online to our website. Either a landlord or a tenant can initiate mediation. So we do, when you go on our website, we have a page that's dedicated to landlords, page dedicated to tenants, and there is an apply now button on each of those pages specific to landlords and tenants. But the applications come into the same place. And from a process standpoint, once we get a request for mediation, we get it entered into our database system, assigned to a mediator, and then the mediator reaches out to the other party to invite them into the process. So if you're a landlord and you'd really like to mediate with your tenant, but you don't maybe have a good lines of communication with them, it's perfectly acceptable for us to reach out to see if they'd be willing to work through mediation, and vice versa. If the tenant's not comfortable talking to their landlord, we can reach out and do that invitation as well. And something that is really helpful in mediation is simply, again, the opening of lines of communication. Sometimes a tenant won't talk to their landlord, but they may talk to us. And we can share that exact same information that the landlord is sharing, but it's better received through a person that they're not in conflict with. Back to information on how to contact us. Certainly, we recommend the website for applying, but if you have any other questions or don't have the means to apply online, you can always contact our office, and we do help people complete the application over the phone. or if you have questions you feel more comfortable emailing, you can use our apply at Mediate.
And if the word consent is causing anybody to think, what's that about? This is a voluntary process, and it requires both parties to say, yes, they are willing to do this. So that's what when we're seeking consent, one person initiates the request, and it's really, will the other person also have the conversation? And really what we say to folks is, there's very little to lose by trying to have a conversation and potentially opening up the dialogue or opening up the lines of information. And why not try? So that's kind of our perspective, is at least give it a try before you take the next steps to something that might be more adversarial.
And along with that, just our last slide here is a way for landlords in particular to let tenants know that this is an option at the time of serving a 5-day. Joanne, if you want to.
Yeah, so we have been partnering a lot with Affordable Rentals, which is a large property owner in the city of Milwaukee, fairly heavily on the near south side. And one of the things that they started to do was they've gone to what they call a mediation first model. They don't start with an eviction. When they give a 5-day, they don't then wait 5 days and start the eviction. They send a notice that includes all of these resources, and then they refer the cases to us and ask us to engage with the parties. Because what they have found is that if we can help folks to get stabilized or to come up with a workable payment plan that can keep them in the property, it's better for everyone. And they've also found that this has helped to increase the communication and kind of lower the temperature of the communication across the parties. Again, we're neutrals, and so we can get information, we can share information. We don't have, a stake in terms of what the particular outcome is, other than we want to avoid a preventable eviction. But what the terms of an agreement look like are really up to the parties. And in this particular group, they've actually taken the practice of, if a party gets involved and engages in a mediated process and comes up with a payment plan, they don't charge late fees during the pendency of that payment plan. They work with us if somebody falls off on the payment plan, they follow up first. So they really use eviction as an absolute last resort, and it's lessened their costs because they're not filing evictions, and it's actually stabilized some of their tenants. And right now, you'll notice on here, there's a line, community advocates and SDC. There's a lot of COVID-related funding available right now. And so that's part of it, is they're trying to help direct folks to resources right away. So if you have a COVID-related loss of income, you might have gotten laid off. You might have children that are presently doing virtual schooling. And so you're a single parent and you have to be home to supervise your children. That's impeding your ability to work. That's a COVID-related connection. And so you may be eligible for rental assistance through some of these programs. And so part of what they're trying to do is help to get information out there as soon as possible. And again, like us, the goal is to share information and de-escalate the situation to try and stabilize, as opposed to landing in court. So that's really, Lindsay and Elizabeth, that's our kind of our structured information, and we can take questions. Oh, I see one of my neighbors on here, Tammy Backhorst from Alderman Bauman's office.
Yeah. I'm actually going to unmute Tammy and give her an opportunity to say a few words and ask a question. Tammy, you should be unmuted. Oh, maybe not.
Okay, thank you very much. And sorry I came on to the call late. Hi, Joanne. Nice to see you. I didn't
Hi,
know
Tammy.
you were presenting today. Anyway, so just wanted to quickly, it wasn't really a question, so is this the time just to quickly introduce myself, and I can put my phone number and email in the chat or wherever you all would find it appropriate. Just wanted to let you know that, or I'll stop there because I did ask a question. So this is okay right now?
Yes, this is perfect.
Okay, thank you so much. Coincidentally today, we have a couple of interns from Marquette, and coincidentally today we were out walking and driving in the near west side of the district, and interacting with neighbors around garbage and trying to find some solutions for nuisance landlords that haven't been dealing with the garbage situation, educating their tenants. And as you all know, there's only so much you can do. And as Joanne highlighted, you have to have willing parties in order to have mediation or to have the conversation amongst either, you know, neighbors and absentee landlords or just neighbors to neighbors. So I look forward to learning more and meeting you all in person, but I'm so happy that I could make this week's webinar. So thank you.
Tammy, thanks so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. So we are going to kick off the Q&A part of our presentation here. If you are joining us live on the Zoom webinar platform, we ask that you please use the Q&A function in the platform. You are also welcome to add any of your questions into the chat or the comment section on Facebook, and we'll be checking that as well. So I do have a couple questions to get us started with. You had mentioned that both the landlord and the tenant could initiate the mediation process. What kind of information are you looking for from both parties in order to get things started?
In terms of the information, it's largely contact information. How do we get in touch with the landlord? How do we get in touch with the tenant? Often we'll ask for phone numbers and email addresses if those are available. We do have information and that's easiest shared through email, so we do like to use that. Beyond that, for tenants, we're often asking for some demographic information directly from the tenants. Again, we're grant funded, so we need to track that information. And then lastly, we ask for whether a court case has been initiated or not. If so, what's that case number, so we can track where that case is in the process, along with a brief description of the type of dispute. We have started asking on the tenant side whether they're seeking COVID-related rental assistance, because we can help connect parties with that through our partnership with community advocates. And we also try to identify if there's any Section 8 assistance involved, because there's different resources available to those folks. But we try to make that initial application fairly brief and easy to navigate, so it's not too overwhelming.
The rest of the information, Lindsay, really is the job of the mediator to then follow up with the parties and start to learn more about what's going on and what's produced the particular situation. And there's often lots of different things involved, right? Sometimes it's rent, sometimes it's condition issues. Sometimes there was a question about, you know, neighborhood services. Sometimes there's unresolved issues with neighborhood services. There's all sorts of things. Every case is remarkably unique. And so it's really up to the mediator then to get information from each of the parties and look for opportunities to try and find kind of what are their shared interests. And often a question might be, do you want to stay there, right? Not everyone wants to stay where they are. Sometimes the mere filing of an eviction, to Amy's point, if there is a filing in court, that can be an inhibitor from someone being able to move out. And so in some cases, part of what we can do is serve to identify a way to come up with an agreement, get that court case dismissed so that the party can then move forward with finding something else. And we have a good relationship with the small claims court. Amy and I have regular communications. Prior to COVID, we were in small claims court mediating 3 days a week. Each one of our mediators, Amy, I, and Debbie, would go in on a different day and we would be mediating in small claims. And since the pandemic, the court refers cases to us. And as she said, we track those and try and make sure that we're monitoring dates so that those don't, you know, they have some priority, because those are very much at risk of impending or you know, there's more imminence sometimes in some of those cases. And we work with the court and we can file agreements that we come up with the parties right directly to the court to get cases dismissed. Amy and I are both also attorneys, and so we have the ability to upload draft agreements and upload them to the court. But we're not serving as attorneys, we're serving as mediators, but we are licensed, and that's a requirement of the court in terms of some of the work. So
thank you. I have a question that just came in, and it does start with a bit of an assumption, which may or may not be true. And that is, why isn't mediation used more often?
Well, I think one is awareness. This was, Amy and I started doing this in 2017 as it relates to eviction. And some of it is, just availability. I think really it's been an easier tool in a lot of cases just to say, this isn't working, we're going to go to an eviction. So I think some of this is just an education and awareness process that, that saying of if the only tool you have is a hammer, the whole world's a nail. An eviction was the hammer, right? So it's just looking at what are other things that I could do. And one of the other things that Amy and I know from our experience is that when conflict presents itself, people don't like to lean into conflict. We tend to shy away from conflict. So my tenant hasn't paid me. Maybe I'm going to send them a text, and then I'm going to send them a 5-day, and then I'm going to move towards eviction because I don't want to deal with the conflict. Or I'm a tenant and my landlord hasn't fixed something and I'm annoyed. And so, it creates this tension. And to her earlier point, we can step in there and help to mitigate some of that tension because we're just there to learn, and we're really shepherding a process towards with a goal of trying to prevent an eviction. So some of this is education, and it's hard to get the word out. Some of it is this idea of, what legislative area would be able to require it. Neither Amy nor I are honestly advocates for mandatory mediation in this environment because we want to, if it's mandatory, the risk is that it's just, I checked the step, I tried, and I'm going through. We want there to be an authentic engagement in the process. And so there are definitely limitations to a mandatory approach.
I think that leads in well to our next question. What are some of the benefits of mediation to both landlords and to renters?
Amy, you want to take this one?
Sure. Some of the benefits to both parties are, and we've said it before, is a way to open up lines of communications. And we talk about assumptions. I think oftentimes when people stop communicating with each other, there are a lot of some assumptions that come into play. So, a tenant isn't able to pay rent. Maybe they are embarrassed or afraid of getting in trouble with their landlord, so they won't reach out and proactively say, hey, this is what's going on, here's my plan, rather they go quiet, and vice versa. Maybe that landlord isn't interested in finding creative ways to connect with that tenant, don't have the time, don't have the resources. And so sometimes just getting that third person involved opens up the lines of communication, which is hugely beneficial to both the landlord and the tenant. Another benefit is that under the current COVID world we're living in right now, there are financial resources available to people. There are a lot of co-partners we work with around this issue of landlord-tenant and eviction. So we can help connect people to resources that maybe they don't know how to access or maybe don't know even exist, that are benefits for landlords and tenants as well. And then in terms of, we're talking dollars and cents, oftentimes we are able to reach a mediated agreement, repayment plan out that's agreeable to both sides, that can save the landlord from having to file the court case and escalate that matter to a situation where maybe when there is an eviction judgment entered and that tenant gets evicted by the sheriff, maybe they've damaged the property, or maybe there are outstanding rent or other monies owed that maybe that tenant isn't collectible after the fact, even if you get a money judgment. So if we can help the parties save money or recoup some funds prior to that eviction filing or prior to that eviction judgment done in a way both parties agree to, that definitely can be far more beneficial than the traditional court process.
That is very helpful. You mentioned that right now, because of the pandemic, there are some resources available to assist with rent. And I do know that the CDC's moratorium on eviction is expected to end at the end of March. What should renters and landlords be thinking about now in preparation for that, or what should they be doing?
So one of the things to be mindful of is, I think one of the biggest misapprehensions on the CDC declaration is that it is not a waiver of rent. So parties are supposed to still be trying to make a good faith effort to pay rent, and they're certainly supposed to be trying to access resources. So when it ends, any rent that is unpaid is still due, which means everyone is at risk of a potential eviction filing for non-paid rent. So if you think that you have a COVID-related loss of income, and like I said, it isn't necessarily as direct as people believe, right? I talked about the virtual schooling. That definitely impacts a parent's ability to work. So sometimes it's a step removed from what might be I didn't get a layoff. It could be a reduction in hours, right? Maybe I'm working, so I don't think I'm eligible because I'm still working, but I am eligible because my hours have been reduced due to COVID. Maybe my employer has reduced the hours. Maybe their business is down and so they've reduced the staff. I can show a reduction in the money I used to earn pre-pandemic to now, and I could be eligible for some assistance. And so if someone is unsure, it's better to try and apply. And if you're really seeking solely, am I going to be qualified? There's, you can go directly to community advocates and apply online. If you think it's just a COVID-related loss of income, I have no doubt I'm going to be able to get this. You apply, there's some documentation, 2 forms that you have to fill out for them. They need proof of legal photo ID, and then they need what they call document of hardship. This is the same information we collect when we're working on cases with landlords and or tenants. And then they evaluate the cause of the financial hardship. And so if folks think they are going to be eligible, we would strongly encourage them to do what it takes to try and get that funding so that when the moratorium is lifted, they might have been able to make some headway, or they may be, Amy and I have both dealt with cases where on the first wave of funding, there was a cap in the amount of eligibility that a tenant could receive or a landlord could receive on behalf of a tenant. And so sometimes we've negotiated or mediated outcomes where community advocates pays a portion and then the tenant engages in a payment plan to pay the balance and they stay put. Sometimes they've used the community advocates funding to pay the arrearage that they owe to the landlord to get the case dismissed, and they've moved out, and we've mediated a move out date with the landlord and the tenant that's manageable. Because again, this issue of, think about, imagine trying to move out in a week or two, and in January, there's lots of impediments to this. So a lot of this is just trying to be proactive, and it flies in the face of what our natural instinct is, which is to just kind of like, put our head in the sand and not deal with some of this stuff because it's super stressful. I mean, everyone is under an enormous amount of stress, and we know that, and stress doesn't necessarily put us in our best, decision-making minds and our best, it can be overwhelming. So
just to add on to that too, with the CDC moratorium coming to an end in March, the end of March, there is now new federal funding that has come available to both SDC and community advocates to administer. It still has the same guidelines as we understand it, where there has to be COVID-related income loss on the part of the tenant, but now the cap isn't $5,000. That's in the past. Tenants can apply and if they're qualified, receive up to 12 months worth of rental payments, which could be either to cover the arrearage, to cover some forward going rent, or a combination of both. So that really just this week is starting to be implemented. And that's something where, particularly if that's in the works, come the end of the month, if that tenant qualifies, to get caught up or potentially for some future rent, that could resolve the issue entirely.
And one of the things that the new funding with this ability to have a little bit of forward paid rent is in the cases where someone might need to be relocating. Like I have a tenant I'm working with who there was a person living with her, and so that person is gone and she can't actually afford the rent in her current place by herself. So she needs to relocate. But the ability to pay her rent and relocate are kind of mutually exclusive because she doesn't have enough money to save for the security deposit, you know, all those issues. So if she can get assistance and get a little bit of that forward going rent, it can give her the cushion she needs to find a new place, think about getting some, you know, preserving some funds to do that. So it appears to us that they took some of the lessons from the first wave of funding and then changed a bit of the approach to how it's being dispersed to make it more useful to everyone.
I think you really hit on something that is a stressor, maybe a less or more indirect stressor of this process, and that's how long it can take. And I'm wondering if you can provide any kind of insights on how long it would take to learn if you're qualified for rental assistance, how long the mediation process typically takes, and you know what people should plan for when they're considering these opportunities.
So there's not really a great answer to any of that, so that's hard. So from a COVID-related assistance application process, if you apply directly to community advocates, I don't know what their processing time is. We have a partnership relationship. So there's a case manager that we work directly with who works exclusively with Mediate Milwaukee to work with us on our cases because of the volume that we have. And so when we're working with her, if we have a completed application, that's the key. Both forms completed, the proof of legal photo ID, the proof of the hardship, she can turn around an application and review it in a couple of days. At which point then the next step is to contact the landlord, and then the landlord has to provide some information, and there's, you know, so there's participation, has to be participation on both halves. A landlord isn't obliged to accept this funding. Now, I've rarely had one that hasn't said, oh no, I don't want to get any rental help. So, but they're not obliged. And the landlord has to provide some information. And once that's done, they make a request for a check, and then it can take, you know, several weeks to a month at that point to get the check issued because their volume is not insignificant. So it can be slow. And then the mediation process is really us kind of being involved in shepherding that and trying to, you know, so that's a unique kind of timing. When Amy and I talk about kind of pre-pandemic or optimistically post-pandemic mediation, where we're not dealing with these kind of deep arrearages, rather we're going to probably be dealing with the more typical things. You know, somebody had a temporary interruption in their work and so they fell behind, or they had an issue with a car or a medical issue, you know, the kind of normal things that disrupt people's financial lives and make them have to make a choice between, do I pay my rent or do I fix my car and then keep my job, right? Those are hard choices to make, and sometimes we have to make them. Those kinds of cases, I mean, it just again depends on how long it takes us to get a hold of the parties' willingness to engage, and then the ability to kind of identify a solution that both parties agree can work and making it happen. So it could be days, it could be a few weeks, and it just depends on the case. And I know that's not a great answer, but it is really, really specific to each situation.
I'd just like to add, maybe to temper folks' expectations a little bit, just in terms of the volume of people applying for mediation, in addition to applying for rental assistance and trying to access information and help from all the different groups that help landlords and tenants right now. Overall volume is sky high. And so we are encouraging people to be patient and know we absolutely understand that it's critical to be responsive and to work through these cases quickly, and we're all doing our best. We do work really hard to try to get information as we can regarding the process of rental assistance applications that came through mediation at Community Advocates to get updates and information on that. We aren't unfortunately able to provide updates and information on SDC applicants, but a lot of people working to try to help provide these resources, and there's also a lot of people trying to access them.
And the one group we didn't mention, Hope House is going to be administering the funding to help folks that are receiving federal housing support, Section 8 and Section 42, I think.
Yes.
So there's a question in the chat that says, a friend likes the apartment in the area, but the landlord won't fix things. Hasn't missed rent, but is thinking about it. She can't afford a new security deposit. What can she do? It's a really good question. It's something that we hear often. I'm going to give some comments, and then I'm sure Amy will have some comments to add as well. One of the things, certainly you can contact the Department of Neighborhood Services if it's an issue that is, that they can address. They exist to make sure that landlords are doing the things that they're supposed to do. And they'll come over and they'll inspect the property. And if it's something that needs to be acted upon, they will write an order to the landlord that says, this is a DNS violation and you have to do this particular thing. And the phone number for DNS, you go to the City of Milwaukee website or you just Google Department of Neighborhood Services, and they're easy to find. The other thing is, not paying rent is a poor option when you have a condition issue in an apartment, because the law just doesn't, that's not a positive in terms of a potential eviction. The better thing to do would be to consider what's called rent abatement. And that's not paying, but with a specific process that says this issue isn't being addressed and I'm going to withhold rent accordingly. You can work with community advocates on that process. They have a person that deals with the rental abatement issue. And again, part of that is going in there and looking at what's going on, because if there's an issue, you don't get to not pay the whole rent, right? So maybe I have a non-functioning sink in one of, maybe the kitchen sink works, but the bathroom sink doesn't. I don't get to not pay the whole rent because of the sink. Maybe there's a portion I can withhold, but not the whole thing. So some of this is bumping up into what the law says and how to make sure that you don't do something that causes you greater harm inadvertently. And again, under normal circumstances, these are things that we could sometimes mediate. This would probably be a case where right now, because of the heavy demand with people being so far in arrears because of COVID, this would be harder for us to do, and we'd probably refer you to community advocates and the abatement folks. But that is something that we would try and engage with a landlord on. Amy, you want to add anything?
My only addition is just sometimes I do a conversation with tenants about the fact that what seems fair and seems like a reasonable approach, the only real leverage a tenant may have is holding on to their rent. Unfortunately, for them, the way the law is written, if you do withhold 100% of your rent, you're absolutely at risk for getting evicted. Whereas if you go through some more formalized channels and withhold a portion of the rent through those channels, then you've taken the right steps to protect yourself. And I would also say sometimes I know people are reluctant to get DNS involved from the standpoint of being concerned about retaliation for doing that. And as Joanne said, we in the past have often gotten involved to try to open up those lines of communication. I know just recently, Debbie, our other mediator, was successful in just making a brief phone call to a landlord to get the furnace fixed at a tenant's property. And the tenant said it had been broken for weeks and weeks. I don't know if the information had gotten to the right person with the landlord, but with the mediator's brief phone call, it was addressed within an hour or two. And so if we are able to be, that tenant was behind on rent and that's how we got involved. But if we're able to address issues like that, sometimes it can be quicker and more amicable than going through some other avenues.
And we are seeing a lot of landlords right now who may have condition issues and they're not fixing it because are these big rental arrearages, and they're saying, I don't have the ability to do some of these things. I haven't gotten rent in 6 months. This isn't the case of of Valerie, but that is something that we are hearing. And so we also try and, to Amy's point, we try and help people to see, okay, imagine, like kind of put yourself on the other side of this and imagine that you haven't gotten paid rent. It's hard to, you've got taxes due, you've got all these different issues to contend with as a landlord. They might want to fix it, but it might be a challenge to do some things right now. So some of this is just helping us to all try and look at the picture a little bit more holistically and from the perspective of everybody who's involved, and to help to maybe depersonalize it sometimes.
Thank you. I do think you make such a good point about ensuring that there's no rent missed, because that can really limit your ability to do anything going forward. And I appreciate sharing those resources. We will have those resources that Amy and Joanne talked about available on Near West Side's website, and we will share them on Facebook as well. As we are getting close to the close of our webinar time, we have a comment here on Facebook that says, I would love to be a part of this. It's sick that people are homeless with children from prior evictions. Milwaukeeans need the help. And I know when we had talked a week or two ago in preparation for this webinar, you both mentioned a new collaboration, the Milwaukee Rental Housing Resource Center. And I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Sure. We try to abbreviate it to the RHRC because it's a lot of words, but probably back in 2017 or 18, we started meeting with a group of stakeholders around eviction prevention resources, kind of in response to Matthew Desmond's book Evicted, and really kind of identified who's working in this space, who else do we need to bring into the conversation. And as a group, we identified goals for what we would like to see in our community moving forward. And one of the goals was this rental housing resource center that fortunately for all of us stakeholders really is coming to fruition this year, and came into fruition virtually last year, just in time really for the pandemic and helping to connect people with related resources. So it is legal stakeholders like Legal Aid, Legal Action, Mediate Milwaukee, community advocates, the Apartment Association of Southeastern Wisconsin, which is a voice and resource for landlords, as well as 211 Impact, Hope House. So we really have tried to bring in Department of Neighborhood Services, City of Milwaukee, Milwaukee County, all of these different stakeholders and service providers as a one-stop shop, so to speak, so that landlords or tenants can come and access either virtually or in person in the near future resources to help them in the whole range of that landlord-tenant relationship.
And part of what this group has really endeavored to do is kind of shift the paradigm to realize that we are all interconnected and we all work together and we're all parts of the same system. And the more we communicate with each other, the more we understand how we can help each other, the better it is for everyone. And we're talking with groups like the Apartment Association about, at the time that leases are entered, talking to their members about make sure your tenant understands what the lease actually says. Make sure you have language in there about what do you do if there's an issue? Do you call the landlord? Do you text? Do you email? Do you consider mediation? Do you start putting that into your leases? So we're having conversations about ways for landlords and tenants to work more effectively together, and then to try and provide kind of a clearinghouse of a place for information for people to try and get assistance more effectively. It's been a really, really good collaboration and remarkably fortuitously timed in light of the pandemic, because it created a bunch of really strong relationships amongst our stakeholders, and we're all working together in this pandemic environment right now really well as a result.
And we meet every other week. We've been having conversation with the courts and how the courts can direct people to resources prior to a filing, really to help push people, to other interventions earlier
Yeah.
in the process.
We're really focused on earlier intervention and prevention and diversion, as opposed to court being the solution.
That is wonderful. It is really, I'm sure, a fantastic resource for those to need it. We have so many amazing organizations kind of working in this realm, and to be able to get them all kind of in one place and collaborating together is no small feat. So congratulations to all who have been a part of it. That is great for Milwaukee. Before we wrap up, I do want to ask, is there anything that we haven't covered today that you think is really important for people joining us to know about eviction, mediation, or anything else related to the topic of resources for landlords and tenants?
I'd like to add one thing real quick about mediation, just in terms of how we handle it. Sometimes if people are familiar with mediation, they think of sitting down at a table with a mediator and the other party and hashing things out, so to speak. And in our process, the way it's set up right now, it's really talking one-on-one with the mediator for the most part. So if people have any concerns about having to confront or deal with heightened emotions, being face-to-face with that other party, we really don't operate in that fashion at this point. It's very much over the phone, one-on-one, and only in instances where we see it could be really beneficial to get the parties on the phone together or sit down face-to-face are we doing it. So we really try to make it accessible and equal for everyone.
The only other thing, I think Amy made a good pitch about mediation and how we try and make it really, accessibility is the issue, right? We want to make sure that we're meeting people where they are and making it as easy as possible to engage in the process. The other thing I would caution everyone is, if someone tells you, oh, the law says this, just have a little grain of cynicism and think, maybe I don't know everything there is to know, and I shouldn't rely on that as my best source, and I'm going to go and seek out other information. Because often we hear information that is, I was told this, and it's not necessarily accurate, and it pushes people to make decisions that aren't always in their best interest. So Amy and I, as I said, we're both attorneys. Our colleague Debbie is an attorney. We do not give legal advice as mediators, but we are familiar with the law. So we can at least point you in the direction of getting better information if you have misinformation about the law.
That is great advice. So we do have up on the screen how to connect with Mediate Milwaukee, Joanne and Amy. That's mediatewisconsin.org. You can call 414-939-8800 or email apply@mediatemilwaukee.com. Thank you both, Joanne and Amy, so much for joining us today. You shared so much information that is really valuable. We have both a lot of renters and landlords in the Near West Side that can really benefit from this. So thank you again.
It's our pleasure, and we've worked with the Near West Side Partners Compact. We've come to some of those meetings, and they're an active and engaged group, and so we really appreciate being asked to participate.
Thanks for having us.
And then before we close our Wednesday webinar, I do want to just do a quick save the date for April 17th. Near West Side Partners is planning a community cleanup along with UMCS, United Methodist Children's Services. And more information will be shared at upcoming webinars on our Facebook page and through our website as we get closer to that date. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next Wednesday.